sitting, and one of the huge consequences of this in some
ways necessary, imperative that flows from the idea of Zionism. We are sitting with a state that is, we're sitting with a country that is consciously trying to exorcise, get rid of its Palestinian population that is still alive and for whom victory is, their very survival is victory. Their very assertion that we are here, we're not going to go away. Memory is not only a weapon, memory is also an achievement, okay? But given the geopolitics in the world today, I was about to say the ongoing dominance, it is still very much the case. I think regardless of whether Trump's buffoonery is only a more obvious manifestation of this. But regardless of who is in power, I mean, Israel has this really powerful friend and has been moving along this trajectory of ethnic cleansing with impunity. What are we to do in order to shift the very dominant global north identification that regardless of its crimes, Israel is still a part of the civilized world? And the non-civilized world, of course, is largely the global north, the global south. What are we, the alternative to what is called the international community, the global internationalists? What do you think are some of the major challenges that we face?
Yes, indeed. I think there are several issues here. They may seem at first glance disconnected, but I think they are interconnected. And if these issues that I will discuss in a minute would kind of fuse together into a counter deal to the American deal of the century, I think there will be hope for a change in Palestine. The first issue has to do with the Palestinians themselves. As you know, Farid, unfortunately, there is still disunity among the Palestinians. And this disunity, among many other things, disables the Palestinian national movement for presenting a clear counter deal to the horrible deal of the century, what I like to call the steal of the century, that the American administration had put forward. This is why, by inertia, the Palestinian Authority still sticks to the two-state solution, which has been dead now for years. And there is no movement to try and redefine the Palestinian liberation project in the 21st century. So Palestinian unity is one thing that would help. It would not be the only factor that would change things, but it would really contribute a lot to our chances for a change. The second issue, and I think this is connected, has to do with the relationship both in the Arab world and in the West between the political elites and their civil societies. The political elites, either in some of the Arab countries and in most of the Western countries, for whatever reason, timidity, or because of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, for whatever reason, tend to give Israel the carte blanche that you were talking about, the immunity for its own impunity on the ground. The reasons vary. We don't have time to go into it. I don't think they are the same for every regime in the world. But what is important, of course, is the bottom line. The bottom line is that these countries, and now some of the Arab countries, legitimize the Israeli actions and give it an umbrella that protects it from any sanctions or any international actions that actually should have been taken, given what Israel does on the ground. Now, the tension here is between what the political elites would like to do in the case of Palestine and on the one hand, and what their civil societies think is the right way forward in the case of Palestine on the other. I think that if we look democratically nowadays, both in the West and definitely in the Arab world, if what the civil society says to us about its own government's policies towards Palestine, we hear only one voice now of criticism, of shame, of embarrassment for the fact that these governments continue to support unconditionally the continued and incremental ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians that began in 1948. So any process that we can contribute to, or even if without our contribution, that would narrow the gap between what the civil society in many parts of the world would like their governments to do on Palestine and what the political elite would dare to do is something that hopefully one day would bring a change. And there are some encouraging signs, one should say. Although Jeremy Corbyn failed in the last election, the fact that the leader of the Labour Party was a known supporter of the Palestine cause is encouraging. I think Barry Sanders, again, although he failed, if you want, still, it is something that wasn't there before. Not to mention the three brave women who are representing Palestine courageously in the American House of Representatives. The last thing I would like to say in this regard is that apart from a change in the civil society and apart from the unification on the Palestinian side, I think that we need to make sure that the idea that informed the so-called peace process, it was not really a peace process, but the idea that informed the peace process, let's say in the last 50 years, was that everything has to go through Washington. It has to be Pax Americana, an American peace. I think it's time for all of us to, in Palestine, historical Palestine, to consider the possible scenario in which actually other international actors play a dominant role in bringing peace and reconciliation. Not the United States, not the United Kingdom, not these countries that share responsibility for the Palestinian disaster and continue to share responsibility for the ongoing disaster. The Muslim world should play a much larger role, I think, in this, as do the countries of South Africa and South America. I think we need a new international coalition for the sake of Palestine that is not concentrated on the West. I just did a tour in Malaysia, and you feel, as an activist for more than 50 years, you feel so free talking there about Palestine. By the way, I felt the same among your lovely hospitality in South Africa. You don't feel the same in America or in Paris or in Germany, where you, as one activist in South America told me, here you're not walking on eggs when you talk on Palestine. You can share with us fully, without any intimidation, your moral position, and people would fully understand what you're talking about. We have to translate it into political capital that can enhance the Palestinians and redress somewhat the balance which is against.
Ilan, I want to ask you about the role of, in some ways, there is of course a global elite. And a part of, much of this global elite is connected to race, you automatically civilized if you're white. If you're not white, then you have to you've got to kind of prove, your English or your French has to be sophisticated. You need to be an academic or something. So there is this kind of global, the privileging of whiteness, the global privileging of whiteness, or the global privileging of capital, for example. If you are wealthy, then okay. So in many ways, what I see, sometimes it masquerades as Judeo-Christian civilization. But there is a sense that Israel is a part of us. And the default position is we support us. Either we support us because we are really family, usually based on the basis of race, and sometimes family, like French society, for example, they can have a sprinkling of black people. They can even have a black minister, and that is like the vindication that French is not a racist, France is not a racist society. We had similar examples, by the way, in apartheid South Africa. Or you can have in Trump's government, I think that there is George Carson or Joe Carson, who's one of these secretaries or ministers in his cabinet. So that's a vindication that Trump is not a racist state. But by and large, I mean, there is this global north thing, and much of it is connected to race, masquerading often, in this particular case, as Judeo-Christian civilization. So the default position for many academics who are a part of the global West, or many global politicians part of the global West, the default position, of course, in the case of Europe, this is further pushed by German or Holocaust guilt or complicity, that they think the historical question can simply be resolved by now allowing the kid that we had bullied and that we had been cruel to, allowing this kid now to be a gangster and giving him complete freedom of reign, because after all, we were partly responsible for the creation of this bully. So, okay. So the question that I then have is, so Israel forms part of the global north, it is part of the civilized society, and it then masquerades as this great philanthropist in some ways to third world countries. We bring you this, we bring you that, we bring you this technology, we bring you that access to resources, or we bribe you. That's also, of course, and in the face of Israel's its technological advances, its startup industry, how do you, and we have this to offer you, how do you go around then, when Israel has so much to offer the world, as they say, go around saying that people should actually boycott Israel?
Yeah. Yeah.
The director of Africa for Palestine, by the way, was asked by an apologist for Israeli Zionism right in the beginning of the COVID pandemic. If Israel comes up with a vaccine now, will you reject this vaccine? Yeah, so.
Yeah, no, good. Yes, I think there are two ways of kind of engaging with what you have put forward in front of us. One is to understand that a settler colonial state like Israel, it stands on two pillars, really. A material pillar and a moral pillar. And the material pillar is not easy to erode, because it is really solidified by strategic connections with arms dealers, with multinational cooperation, with regimes all around the world that need either security services or high-tech abilities and so on. And I think that even a very successful boycott campaign, and the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanction campaign for Palestine, is a very successful movement, would find it very hard, despite its achievements in this field, to really erode this pillar. Although I think that with time, this could also happen. However, the moral pillar that is important for the Israelis has been eroded seriously. So you can provide weapons to everyone. You can have great security relationship. You can even provide the world with a vaccine for COVID-19, as your interlocutor was trying to challenge you. But this does not compensate whatsoever for crimes against humanity. So if you have a modicum of decency in you, this you cannot be bought by the material achievements of the state and say, you know, because of these material achievements, you should allow us to kill children, to starve the people in Gaza, to dispossess the people of the West Bank. I think that with all the fake news around, and especially with the terrible regimes we have now in the UK and the US, we forgot that still most people in the world do not think in such a way. People are still compassionate about human lives. People still regard dignity as something as important and don't want to be humiliated and don't like to see other people humiliated. And injustice, contrary to what people tell us, is still a force to be reckoned. Injustice still causes people to object to it, to resist it, and so on. So when you cannot separate the moral and the material dimensions of Israel. And they are losing constantly on the moral battle. And the more they're losing on the moral battle, the more they try to solidify the material one. It makes a lot of sense. They would buy Saudi Arabia if they could, just to make sure that they have another Arab country supporting it. So that's one side of what you have just put in front of us. The second one is very important to remember, and this you know very well from South Africa. Israel is an alien society and one which alienates the region in which it is and is being alienated by its own behavior. It has an image which the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak liked to put forward, that Israel is the villa in the jungle. You know, the villa, because we are part of the civilized Judeo-Christian world, and the jungle, you know, is the Arab world in this case.
The barbarian.
Exactly. Very much like the Crusaders. The Crusaders had a similar self-image of their kingdoms. But the reality is that you are geographically, culturally, and historically in the Arab world. You're not a villa. You are a self-imprisoned prison in many ways in the Arab world. You've decided to be a gated community. And within your own gated community, only 50% of the population are actually Europeans of European descent. 20%, much more than 20%, between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean. Today there are 12 million people. Half of them are Palestinians, so they are not part of the villa. Half of those who think that they are in the villa are originally from Arab and Islamic countries, the Arab Jews, the Mizrahi Jews. Yes, Israel succeeded in turning them into anti-Arab, self-hating Arabs, if you want. But I'm not sure it will always succeed in doing it, because at the same time, they have pushed them into the social and economic margins of the society. So we will see whether this project of de-Arabizing the Arab Jews will succeed. And I will finish my comment on this, is that after a third generation of settlers, it will become clear to the Israelis that they are part of the Middle East, they are part of its problems, but they're also part of its solution. And their attempt to claim that it does not exist will not work. I always like to say that the Middle East is like a huge ferry in the ocean that can either go to a safe harbor of success, prosperity, and rebuild its famous and glorious past of the Islamic civilizations that were there and so on. Or it can drown. And if it drowns, like the Titanic, the fact that Israel has one of the best cabins on the ferry would not help it when it hits the iceberg. So I think that's something that the Israelis are not aware enough of the historical process of it.
Ilan, you know, South Africa, in relation to the rest of Africa, as an apartheid state. As you know, I mean, it is an incredibly beautiful country. It is, it is just a stunning country. And sometimes I often thought, that if South Africa didn't have the geographical and physical beauty that it had, perhaps apartheid would have been more bearable for this part of the world. But one of the interesting things about apartheid South Africa is its contribution to scientific development in the world of apartheid South Africa. From an relatively insignificant thing, such as the creepy crawlies that you use that cleans the swimming pools and goes around, South Africa invented that. Apartheid South Africa invented the automatic transmission machines, where you get your money from, this auto banks where you get your money from. South Africa invented the brain scan. Apartheid South Africa invented the brain scans. And apartheid South Africa gave the world its first heart transplant, which was one of the major achievements, in the medical world in a very, very long time. So the transmission of coal into petroleum and so on. So here was a highly developed country. And this country paraded this technology and scientific developments to the rest of the world and bought the buy-in of a particular community. And of course, in many ways, people know that they're buying in there, but it's better to articulate these things in a nicer term, like you say, you're going there to support that country's economy. You're going there because you're interacting with other academics there, and those academics are more open-minded. So, and they need to be supported because they're having a tough time in South Africa. Or you're going there you are a liberal in your European society, so I'm going to go to apartheid South Africa in order to advocate my more liberalism and show them what an open-minded person is, and so on. And above all, the world needs cooperation. The world needs cooperation. We need to talk to each other. We need to bring people closer to others. So as academics, it's our responsibility to foster that cooperation with each other. And now you want to come along and tell us that we should be boycotting other people in Israel, Israeli institution, and Israeli academics. What do you say to this logic? Of course, I've laid out the things in speaking about the achievements of scientific apartheid. But what do you have to say to academics who use this kind of logic as a cover for their, in some ways, very narrow-minded, this is my field, and I'm looking for cooperation in my field, and then I use this whole academic cooperation thing as a way of advancing a particular part of my own career?
Yes, definitely. First of all, I would say that it's very important to state from the beginning that when I boycott a state or a society, when I'm asking the international community to exert harsh pressure on it for the sake of an oppressed nation, oppressed people, colonized people, I am engaging in a dialogue with that society. I'm not ignoring it. I'm not ignoring the society that I'm boycotting. I'm having a harsh dialogue with it. That is true. It's not an easy dialogue, neither for me, not for them. And then we have to ask ourselves, why do I have this dialogue? In the case of Israel, it's very clear because the other dialogue was attempted. For more than 70 years, Palestinians, Arabs, people who genuinely were interested in peace and reconciliation between the settler community of Israel and the indigenous native Palestinians were involved in the so-called peace process. And it took time, even for me personally. I know from my own biography. It takes time to understand that for the Israeli leadership, of whatever generation and of whatever color, political color, the peace process is just an alternative means of continuing the oppression, the colonization, and the dispossession. Maybe for some people it's very obvious from the beginning, For others, it takes more time to uncover what or discover what lies behind the discourse of peace and reconciliation of the liberal Israelis or the Israeli peace camp or the Israeli peace initiative. The most kind of indicative example of this is the Oslo Accord of 1993, that even Palestinians for a moment were mesmerized enough to believe that maybe it's an historical moment of reconciliation at the beginning of rectifying past evils. And then about a year and a half later, they understood that Oslo was just a trick by Israel to try and lower the costs of the occupation and to soften the criticism in the world about its brutal policies in the occupied territories. So, so first of all, I'm saying this is a different kind of conversation because any other conversation failed. And there's another reason why we are engaged in such a conversation. Because the only other way of toppling down an evil regime of military rule, of abuse of human and civil rights, is the one that some Palestinians have tried, and some are still trying, which is using their meager military means to fight the largest and biggest and strongest army in the region and one of the strongest armies in the world, with disastrous consequences for the Palestinian society. So this is part of the liberation struggle in the 21st century that takes into account the military balance of power, the economic balance of power, the political balance of power, and the moral balance of power. So I'm actually saying that the most honest, civilized people in the world are those who cannot sit on their chair and do nothing in the face of this blatant injustice that is looking at us from every television screen and screaming to us from newspapers and websites and so on. So I think that this is a clear act of peace, actually. This is almost a pacifist way in the tradition of Mahatma Gandhi and others to try and bring down a situation in a military and a rule that on a daily basis kills, wounds, and imprisons a native indigenous population, and has been doing it for the last more than the last 100 years. So I think this is really an important part, and therefore, you know, any attempt to say that the people who are supporting this boycott are anti-Semites, when actually they are anti-racist and anti-colonialist, is ridiculous. And my final point in this is that if as an Israeli academic, even if you are not directly involved in the operation of the occupation, the dispossession, and the oppression, even if you're not directly a member of the apparatus that you know, implements these injustices, you are complicit if you don't do anything. You are as guilty as if you don't do anything. I always said, and with this I'll finish for it, a kilometer from my old University of Haifa, there is a detention and torture center. I say to my colleagues in Haifa University, if you are so near to such an obscenity and you don't say anything, you support it.
That's Haifa University, yes.
Yeah.
But Ilan, you know, you have this idea, it's a very, very presumptuous idea, but it's also very common. We are academics, and immediately in that statement is we are a cut above the rest, we are isolated from the normal rules of morality, we are guided by our quest for scientific truth, and in this quest for scientific truth, we need to cooperate. And we need to cooperate with other scientists, whether in the humanities or in the hard sciences. We need to cooperate with them in order to advance our discipline or our science. I mean, much of the academy is based on cooperation, both interdisciplinary and interinstitutional and international. So in some ways, why are you insisting that I, as an academic, interested purely in the pursuit of empirically verified or philosophically argued truths? Why should I, as an academic, be dragged into your politics?
Yeah, because a good question. Because as an academic, you of all people have the time, the energy and the resources to understand a more complex reality by which your corporation, you have to see what your corporation is contributing to beyond the contribution to a specific area of inquiry or beyond the contribution to a specific project. If I can show you, and I can show you, that your corporation provides immunity for crimes against humanity, for war crimes, for an abuse, systematic abuse of civil and human rights, you have to reconsider what is more important. The fact that you are part of this umbrella of immunity, or the fact that you have advanced a certain technological or scientific project. Because the best way of explaining to people is probably looking back at those historical case studies, and you mentioned one important one, apartheid South Africa, but we can go even further and talk about Nazi Germany and talk about some of the darker regimes in history that you could always say that they would have the capacity to develop something with you which is purely scientific. But then when you understand the moral atmosphere, the moral conduct of your partners, you understand how you empower them, how you immunize them, and how you contribute to the suffering of those at the receiving end. Academia is not made out, it's not an atomized institution. The academic community is usually part of a larger outfit. And that larger outfit is responsible both collectively and individually in what is being done in their name. So if I am a member of the Department of Physics, and I just deal with global warming, okay, but my university to which I belong, I'm a member of its faculty, has connections that allow the selling of arms or developing of arms that hurt other people, that are used against civilians, that as a result of these development, people are losing their limbs and are wounded and are traumatized and killed. If I am part of that institution, even if I'm not directly involved in that kind of project, I have a moral responsibility to say there's something beyond my own area of inquiry, my own career, because otherwise, why should states provide money for academic institutions? We have to remember the original idea, that you wanted a community of people that have the time to research for the benefit of their societies. And their benefits are not just material benefits, they're also moral.
Ilan, I'm a proud faculty member of the first university in the world, the University of Johannesburg, that decided to cut off all institutional relations with Israeli universities because we found that Israeli universities were complicit. Complicit by their silence, and more importantly, complicit in how the different, often say engineering or physics or Those were an intrinsic part of oiling the machinery of dehumanization. And then, of course, I mean, all the caveats or all the perks that it gives to members of the military, of the army, and so on. But so in doing so, the one argument that was raised during our Senate's debates at that time, it's 10 years ago now, was the question of academic freedom. I mean, and academics, of course, hold this kind of thing sacred. When universities institute policies or measures to discourage or to cut off ties with other institutions, doesn't this in some ways damage academic freedom and the free flow of information between institutions?
Yes, first of all these actions that we are talking about, the actions that the University of Johannesburg has taken, the actions that in the past individuals and later societies and governments took against apartheid South Africa, all these actions have some a price tag attached to them sometimes, undoubtedly. And we don't live in an ideal world where I would boycott you, which would be the right thing to do, and I may not in this process may even hurt one or two persons I wouldn't like to hurt, and so on. This is life. I wish life was so pure that we could have had these pharmaceutical actions such as boycotting directly only those who are responsible. But we are therefore boycotting institutions first of all, and not people. And I think this is the right moral thing to do. As for academic freedom, I think we cannot talk in the name of academic, we cannot use the argument of academic freedom to object to academic boycott of institutions if these institutions are either directly or indirectly involved in preventing academic freedom for the Palestinians. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot argue that you should talk to me because we both believe in academic freedom, but I would ask you not to interfere in my right to abuse the academic freedom of the Palestinians. And I think this is something which really is the most important message to come that goes to Israeli academics. And I would like to show you something which is very interesting that our viewers and listeners probably might find interesting as well. As you know, some of our best friends, and I don't mean it cynically, because Noam Chomsky is a good friend, and Norman Finkelstein is a good friend. When I started being involved in the academic boycott campaign very early on, and they were very close kind of associates, they asked me not to do this, and they said exactly by this argument of academic freedom, but they had another argument. They said you will kill the rest of the Israelis who are willing to argue from within against. I mean, you will kill the last kind of cell of resistance, if you want, within the Israeli Jewish academia if you boycott institutions. And lo and behold, actually, from the moment we started the academic boycott campaign, the number of Israeli academics who support the BDS, and particularly the academic boycott in it, has tripled, if not quadrupled, and has constantly increasing. And in fact, we, for the first time, heads of Israeli universities, for the first time after 52 years of occupation, said something which was wishy-washy and not very forceful, but at least they said something about their concern of academic freedom in the occupied territories. They would have never done it had the BDS campaign not been effective. There was no reason for them to do it, and the only reason was that they felt that a lot of academics around the world feel that there is a moral validity for this act of academic boycott And I think deep in their heart, they understand. They are the first ones who understand why. Not, it's not what they are saying, of course, but I know them very well. I come from, so to speak, from the belly of the beast. I know exactly, I know that they know. They really know. And therefore, this conversation with them through these kinds of means is very important.
I mean, an old one, you know, that we in South Africa face regularly. The favorite one of the apartheid regime was, why don't you look at, well, in this case, why don't you look at North Korea? Why don't you look at the rest of Africa, where there were all of these dictators in charge? Human rights are being violated. I mean, look at the Uyghur people in China. Human rights are being violated all over the world. Why are you insisting on singling Israel out for your academic boycotts or for your general BDS campaigns? What would you say to this in the context of the academic boycott?
Every generation of conscientious people in modern history has one or two, sometimes three examples of injustice that epitomize the overall injustice. Thank God that at the time that the ANC needed anti-apartheid solidarity movement in the world, despite the fact that there were other abuses of human rights and civil rights in the globe, the energy of so many people was channeled into inflating the the anti-apartheid solidarity movement around the world. It's not because there were no other injustices. It's because the apartheid South Africa seemed to epitomize everything that was wrong in the kind of what you rightly call the kind of civilized world oppression of other people. At another period, it was Vietnam, and then it was Chile. In recent years, this is Palestine. Now, Palestine is singled out not because the worst kind of atrocities are taking place there. No, Palestine is singled out because of the hypocrisy, because of the double talk, because of the denial. There is still a widespread denial that there is a problem in Palestine. There is still a widespread denial that Israel is an apartheid state that oppresses the native people for more than a century. This kind of injustice, where the unjust act itself, the crime itself is denied, of course, focuses everyone's attention and is indicative of all the other injustices. You know, I participated in a demonstration in Buenos Aires that I was invited to when I was there by the teacher unions for a raise in their meager salary. And everybody was donning the Palestinian flag. Some of them didn't even know exactly what was happening in Palestine. But I asked them, why are you not waving the Argentinian flag? Why are you waving the Palestinian flag in an industrial action against the Ministry of Education in Argentina? And they said, because this is the flag of justice. And I always remember Nelson Mandela saying that South Africa will never be fully free unless Palestine is free. There is this connection between these historical case studies that were unique because of the hypocrisy around them, the double standards, the international immunity for the crime, and a lot of people understand that this symbolizes more than just the case itself. It symbolizes injustice towards workers around the world, towards other minorities, indigenous people, of course. And therefore, you will see that at the forefront of the people who are now working in solidarity with Palestine, the older generation among them, are the same people who were at the forefront of the anti-apartheid solidarity.
Absolutely.
So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think this will only grow with the younger generation. It's too difficult to hide now what is going on in this age compared to the 60s or the 70s, where you could still prevent people from knowing exactly what goes on. People know, and people would react then.
We're beginning to wind up, Ilan, but you know, in the apartheid era, the only people who raised this question, why are you singling out apartheid? They pretended that they had an interest in Tibetan issue. They pretended that they had an issue in North Korean issues. They never really had. They weren't members of Freedom for Tibet. But it was just an argument meant to trip those who were actually engaged in the struggle against apartheid.
Absolutely.
So they weren't honest people. Not a single person during the apartheid era who raised the question of why are you singling out apartheid South Africa? So the whole lot who are raising this question of why singling out apartheid, they don't care a hoot about human rights issues. They care about defending Israel and their interest in Israel. But there's often another argument that I raise, Ilan, is that Palestinian society on the whole, now when you are in solidarity with, as a rule, you listen and you are guided also by those that you are in solidarity with. And if those that you are in solidarity with ask you for this, you don't come along with your presumptions, oh, I'm this activist from South Africa, I'm this white guy, I'm this privileged. You ask, what do they want from me? And none of the other countries have unequivocally asked the international community, as the Palestinian community have asked, to engage in a boycott of Israel. So if you claim to be in solidarity with, which by the way, the people who are raising, they don't even claim, but to be in solidarity with means to listen. And they have asked this. Ilan, yeah, one last one that I want you to respond to. Okay, so in South Africa in general, the state is in support of BDS. There are contestations like there is in any other state, but the ruling party in the country and most of the parties who are in opposition, with the exception of the white-dominated Democratic Alliance and the Christian reactionary right-wing African Christian Democratic Party, who just has one member in parliament. All the rest, I mean, the political consensus in South Africa is against the state of Israel's policies towards Palestine, towards the Palestinians, and is overwhelmingly, like the South African population, in support of the Palestinians. To what extent should a state with an ethos like this be pushing universities in the direction of academic boycotts? I mean, you could ask the same question. If the state is committed to non-racialism and to non-sexism, to what extent should the state impose a non-sexist ethos on that university?
Yeah.
And is this not an infringement of academic freedom and the autonomy of universities?
Yeah, that's a very tough question, I would say. You would have hoped, first of all, that the academics themselves would come to those conclusions and the state would not prevent them from doing it, which is what happens in Britain and the United States, where the government is opposing those universities that are they want to support the BDS. I think it really goes together with what we have seen in the campaign against South Africa with the whole concept of BDS. It's a complete concept. Boycott exists, by the way, where there are no sanctions and no divestment. Boycott is something citizens do. Sanctions is something governments do. Divestment is something that the financial sector is doing. Now, if South Africa as a state would adopt not just a pro-boycott policy, but if it would adopt the same policy that it wanted anti-apartheid state to adopt against the apartheid, then yes, I think you're right. In other words, when a country like Ireland at first had a civic society support for boycott, and the Irish government objected to impose sanctions on South Africa, apartheid South Africa, it made no sense for the government, even if it had sympathy with the civil society action, to impose sanctions that would also, would oblige everyone else, including universities, to abide by this policy. But once sanctioned, and we still need the first country in the world that would be brave enough to use the South African model and say sanctions is now a legitimate weapon in order to stop the destruction of the Palestinian people on the ground. We have not yet seen such a country. Once this is enacted, I think you can have also the recruitment of the society by other means to make it a powerful weapon of solidarity.
Ilan, I listened to you many times before in South Africa, in Turkey, and it's always very inspiring listening to you. Earlier on, when I was just thinking about our session tonight, and I didn't need to, I'm very familiar with your work, I've read most of them, but I still browse through some of your works, And Ilan, I mean, really, you are a Bears Nudi of Israel, of Israeli society. Bears Nudi, I mean, was a very promising son of the Afrikaner Dutch Reformed Church community. He was young and he was upcoming and he was rising and he was so horrified by the Sharpeville shootings that took place in '61 that he made a complete turnaround. And if there is one figure in South Africa that we have as a prophet, it is Beers Nodi. There were others, Bram Fischer, for example, who was white, but Bram was a communist, and Bram had a very cultural connection with the Afrikaner community, but it wasn't, but Beers was the promised son, and he turned his back, and the price that Beers had to pay. So here you are, a Jewish prophet. And so we're very grateful for your contribution. I don't know if I can stir your memory on something. Now, you've inspired me many times, but that was the finest moment, and I may be putting you on the spot now. In conclusion, at one of your talks that I heard you in Turkey, you spoke about why we are fighting and why we are resisting, and that we're not resisting because we are going to achieve victory, but that there were other larger moral reasons beyond the political victories. Do you recall what I'm talking about?
Vaguely. I think I do. First of all, thank you so much. I'm humbled and honored by this unjust comparison, but thank you so much. Very kind of you. I don't recall the exact words, but I think I recall the sentiment of what I was.
I want to hear it again.
I will try and articulate it, probably in a different way, but I hope with the same message. And the message was, I think I usually relate to it with a younger audience that are a bit impatient when they don't see political or immediate political dividends. And it's very easy to fall into despair. by saying, you know, we've been trying for 15 years, for 20 years, and nothing changes. The world still allows Israel to do what, and so on. And I think in response to this, I said that a genuine activist for justice and freedom is not only interested in achievements that are tangible, that are even happening in his or her own life. You are doing it, and that's the only thing that will give you energy and power not to give in. You are doing it because you cannot even imagine not doing it because of the moral imperative. It is the kind of, when people ask me, when did you become who you are? And when did you change the disc? When did you leave your ideological camp and so on? And I always say, I don't remember when, and I don't know if I will ever know exactly when. But I do remember one thing. I knew the moment when there was no way back. And there was, and when you know there's no way back, that you are at peace with yourself, you know that you're doing the right thing. And this knowledge is far more important than a kind of a checklist or stockpiling every year of achievements or failures. It is knowing that you are a decent human being that works for a just cause is a great gift that we have been given if we are part of it. And this should give us energy for continuing.
Professor Ilan Pappe, historian, academic, activist, freedom fighter, and a great mensch, you know. Thanks so much for being with us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you, comrade. You mean an enormous amount to us and to the Palestinian people, and we hope to benefit from you in the future again. Thanks a hell of a lot, Ilan. I really enjoyed talking to you.
So did I, Farid. Thank you, and thank you for everyone else. And
Pleasure.
keep safe and well, all of you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Salam